everybody. I hope you are doing well. I'm Afefe with Touch by Tarot here for episode 2 of Think Tank Thursdays. If you're new to my channel, I am an intuitive tarot reader, and most of my readings are videos are around, empowerment, healing, self-growth, getting in touch with our spirit guides, that sort of thing. And I also do pick a cards for the new moon and full moon. But because I am also a former newspaper journalist, I'm interested in politics, and so I've decided to do a weekly series. I may do a little bit more as we get farther into the campaign season. But for right now, I'm doing weekly Think Tank Thursdays. This is episode 2. And the topic that I'd like us to consider today, you all, is should jurors and election workers be considered a protected class in the United States on a federal level, right? Because we've heard so much and we've seen so much that has come out around election workers and jurors who are being threatened, especially in the wake of the 2020 election because of Trump, and also in the, as we prepare to go into the 2024 election cycle. We need poll workers. We need people to be able to perform their jobs without fear of retribution, and certainly without fear of downright violence and harm to themselves or their families. And this has become an increasing, event and happening. So, and I also see some differences between how things are treated at the federal level and how they are treated at the state level. All right. So there's the question in our think tank for the day. Please weigh in. I'd love to hear what you think about this, because again, should we have our jurors, especially grand juries, who in Georgia, we found out that those names were released. The people who handed down the indictment in the most recent Georgia indictment against Trump et al., their names were released. And so I found out yesterday that, I think it was either through AP or the Times, but it was a reputable media outlet, that because those names were released, some extremist group, far right group, they would not name the group. And I'm actually glad they didn't. It would have, brought them more attention, which is what they would want. But this group got a hold of their names, I guess searched some public records and released their names and addresses, at least what was the latest available, and began to disseminate this information nationally to all of these, alt-right groups. And so now these people are receiving threats. There's this momentum being, this call to arms again to cause these people harm for doing their civic duty. Should their names have been released? Should there be legislation and some reforms, some sort of protections put in place for people who are called upon to do their civic duty, who rise to the occasion and do what is right for the sake of democracy? They shouldn't have this blowback. Again, when I mentioned earlier about the difference, I think, between federal and perhaps on the state level. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I did not check this before I taped, and I'm sorry for that. I don't believe that the jurors, the grand jury in Jack Smith's case in D.C., I don't believe that those names were released. But in Georgia, they were. So I guess that is more of a, that's a Georgia state law. Many states, other states probably have the same policies in place. But when it comes to federal issues, there seems to be, more of an immediate response and protections that are in place. A case in point, a Texas woman, I found out yesterday, this is an article that I got from the New York Times yesterday, and the headline says, Texas woman charged with threatening to kill judge in Trump election case. A woman in Texas by the name of Abigail, I'll just use her first name, Abigail, she called Judge Tanya Chutkan's chambers after Jack Smith's indictment was handed down. And she said, quote, on the judge's voicemail, "If Trump doesn't get elected in 2024, we're coming to kill you. So tread lightly, bitch." Quote unquote, using her language, excuse that. So she also issued a threat against Texas, because she's in Alvin, Texas. She issued a threat against Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who's a black Democratic congresswoman from Texas. This was also right after Trump went on Truth Social saying, if you go after me, I'll come after you. Remember that, right? So there again, here we go, drumming up this violence. And we've got someone like this Abigail sitting in Alvin, Texas, making phone calls to Judge Chutkan's chambers. Now, what happened was 3 days later, federal agents showed up at Abigail's home in Alvin, Texas to say, excuse me, do you even understand what you just did and what the repercussions of that could be, right? She looks at these agents and basically says, in terms of the threat against Jackson Lee, not Chutkan, she says, don't worry, I don't have any plans to go to Washington or Houston to harm these people. But she said, but if Sheila Jackson Lee comes to Alvin, then we need to worry, okay? So in other words, she backed down, but only so far. She stands for what she knows. She's saying, I said what I said to federal agents. All right. So she's behind bars as we speak. She is in jail. She was denied bond, and she's there. I think she's on hold at least for 30 days. We'll see what happens, to her after that. And her father comes out by way of not justification, but whatever. And he says, oh no, she's a non-violent alcoholic who watches the news, and when she drinks too many beers, she tends to get carried away. No, no, no. So we'll see what happens to Abigail of Alvin, Texas for issuing that kind of threat. But my point is, within 3 days, federal agents were at her door. And after that, she was behind bars. So there was immediate action taken. Now we have election workers who we've seen in the news, we've heard a lot about. My heart goes out to them. You all have heard a lot about Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, okay? Those two election workers that were I believe at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta during the 2020 elections. They are a part of this big case in Georgia because several of the people who have been indicted, it is because of the role that they directly played to try and intimidate and threaten Shay Moss and her mom, Ruby Freeman. However, my point is, whereas the 3 days it took for federal agents to show up because of the threatening call that was made to Judge Chutkan, here we have women like Moss and Freeman, who 3 years later, their lives have been completely turned upside down. Yes, have they received a lot of support from the White House and elsewhere? They have. I think they understand that by and large, the American people stand with them. But this has been a long, long process. And part of what this is another piece that I got. This one is from the Associated Press that came out late yesterday evening. And the headline that they use is election workers who face frequent harassment see accountability in the latest Georgia charges. But that accountability, again, 3 days versus 3 years. There should have been, in my opinion, Think Tank Thursdays, if I can say it. We've got to do better to protect our regular average Joe citizens who are out here trying to do their duties. These women, what they have been subjected to, as well as election workers across the nation, is unbelievable. And this goes across party lines. These are people, Democrats and Republicans. If you are working, if you are somehow tied to elections and the outcome of elections, it seems, people who are out here making these threats, it crosses party lines. It doesn't matter who you are. As it relates to these two women, we've heard a lot about Rudy Giuliani, and that's actually who I'm going to spread a couple of cards on today, you all, who, has, as you heard, went crying to Trump last night about having his legal bills paid because he's going broke. We'll get to that in a moment. But I did not know. I knew Rudy was involved in all of this, but I actually, in this story from the Associated Press, didn't know that he actually said, let me find the quote for you. He called them and their work at this State Farm Arena in Atlanta during the 2020 counts and recounts. He said that these two women went about their dirty, crooked business, illegally counting as many as 24,000 ballots. And he said these election workers, meaning Moss and Freeman, Freeman and her daughter, Shay Moss, that they were passing around USB ports as if they were vials of heroin or cocaine to infiltrate the Dominion voting machines. This is what Giuliani put out there. I did not know that direct thing. As if they were vials of heroin or cocaine. That is that is, not only is it extremely racist and stereotypical, you've got these black women in a majority black city counting these ballots, and so they're in cahoots, passing around USB ports as if they're the typical drugs that run through their communities, is basically what he was getting across. So what they did, if you notice some of those names on the Georgia indictment, I certainly didn't recommend. They were down at the bottom. And of course, as a person of color, I see some black faces on them. Like, wait a minute, what? So these people, Harrison Prescott Floyd, Trevion Cootie, and Stephen Clifford Lee, they apparently, the role that they played was they were instrumental, I guess because they're black, that Giuliani, Trump et al. Brought them in to try and influence Moss and Freeman, to basically get them to go along and basically say, you're in danger, but we can help protect you if you work with us. They basically, that's part of their twisted role, and they were brought in. Were they brought in for money, promises of influence? We don't know, but now they're going to get theirs. Fonnie Willis is going to take care of that. We're going to see what happens. And I also think that's another reason, there's been some pushback from Chris Christie and others, more in relation to why Trump was involved in the Georgia thing, but we'll talk more about that later. But the distinction between the indictment in Georgia and the indictment in Jack Smith's indictment in D.C. is stark to me. Is there some crossover? Yes, because all of this falls out from the election, from the 2020 election. But the extent to which certain things were done and how things played out, Georgia has a very, very distinct role. And I have yet to read, it's almost 100-page indictment. I have yet to read it. I am going to take some time in the coming weeks and start to go through it in more in detail. But the idea that Rudy came out and spread those lies. So he was extremely instrumental in that. We have here as well, 3 years later, going back to the time it takes between certain people, the response from the government against certain people when they go after a federal judge versus an election worker or even a juror who has done their civic duty. 3 years later, the U.S. Department of Justice has filed an indictment against a 30-year-old Indiana man who threatened a Michigan election official who was in a Detroit suburb. And this woman actually is a Republican who he threatened to kill. And he said, you're going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it because of Michigan's results after the 2020 election. So, but 3 years later, they just issued, 3.5 years later, I'm sorry, that he's now going to go, no, wait a minute, I'm getting it wrong, you all. I want to make sure I get it right. Yes, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison because of what he did to Tina Barton, who is a Republican in Detroit. So again, my point with that is this notion that in certain instances there can be an immediate response and in others there's not. Perhaps there would be more of an immediate response, and more than that, more importantly, would be a deterrent if we had, some forms of protections in place for people who are called to participate, especially in high profile cases, grand jury cases. Certainly there needs to be something that is in place to protect people so that because it's not like you have a choice, really. When you're called upon, the government will say, if you don't show up, you can be in big trouble. This is part of your obligation to the United States of America as part of your citizenship. When we call you to exercise, your role as a citizen, this is what we expect you to do. It's not like you can flip the government the bird and say, I'm not doing it because I don't want to deal with these right-wing hate groups. You don't have that option. All right. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that. And I'd love to know, if you agree with me that there should be some sort of protections, federal protections, protected class for people who are called upon in these circumstances, for jurors and certainly election workers as well. All right. Now let's move on to Rudy Giuliani, who I shared with you that disgusting quote for him, and that is in the indictment, by the way. So Again, that's something that I'm going to start to read, and maybe many of you already have or are starting to go through it, or at least download a copy. It is a historic document, as is Smith's indictment, all of these indictments for that matter. But this one is really, just the graphic detail and the way it is step by step what was done. It is truly a historic moment that we're living through. And I think that if among, while we all have been talking about what could possibly happen, will Trump go to jail? We'll look into some of that later. I tend to think not. I tend to think that even if he is found guilty, and it goes to trial, he's found guilty, I tend to think they're going to find some way, just because of who he is, they will find some way to put him, exile him, put him someplace else, but to have him in some sort of federal prison or general prison population, yeah, I don't know about all that. But let's go to Giuliani, who has now decried, gone and had a personal sit down with Donald Trump and said, I can't afford my legal bills. I have been, unlike Michael Cohen, I have been your boy. It also makes me wonder, we know that Giuliani has spoken with, he has had to go and speak with the DOJ. He has spoken with, he's been called, his testimony is on the record. And there were some questions around, did he flip? Did he sing like a bird? I remember looking at that a while back, and what Spirit gave me, what the guides gave me, was he hedged his bet. He wanted to see, because he is a lawyer and he is, diabolical, he wanted to see how much he could get from it and the extent to which his own interests could be protected before he would be willing to give Trump up. So I've got some questions around what he did or did not actually say during those interviews. I think he definitely hedged his bet and tried to buy time, but now, his costs are mounting, and he's gone to his buddy Trump, and Trump is looking at him like, what do you expect me to do for you? I feel like Rudy's having his, he's on the Titanic. And if anything, Donald Trump might be like, well, look, remember when you had kids and they had the little arm floaties, I feel like Donald Trump is going to be like, look, I got a couple of floaties for you maybe, but that's all I can do. Because Trump, part of what Trump has always done, as you all know, is he's promised people who are in cahoots with him, if you get in trouble, I got your back. I will take care of you. I'll make sure. That's why Walt Nada is still walking around with him. Like, I don't care what, this is my guy, and I'm with him until the end of time. Perhaps he's on the Titanic as well. But I want to go to Spirit, you guys, before we close out and see what's up. What kind of slippery slide here is going on with Giuliani. There are questions around, because he is an attorney, would he wind up, if he runs out of money, would he wind up just having to represent himself against the charges? I don't know that he actually could. There's a question mark around whether some of that is actually doable. In certain cases you can appear pro se, but in others I don't know that it is acceptable. It depends on the type of case. And for these charges that Giuliani's facing, I don't know that he can. The other idea is that he could get a court-appointed attorney. That's, wow, how the mighty have fallen. That would be a really interesting scenario. So we'll see what happens. I do want to ask, that's what we're going to go to Spirit with to close out. So Spirit, as it relates to Rudy Giuliani, will Rudy Giuliani wind up having to get court-appointed counsel? Is he truly at the end of his rope financially in terms of having the ability and the wherewithal to take care of his defense? We have the Eight of Wands, so that's him out here scrambling. He's talking to Trump and others, trying to figure out what he can do. And I got the Sun, which is really interesting. In the context of that question, I do think that he's going to reach a point of desperation. Well, he'll take whatever help he can get. You know what I'm saying? Because these charges are not going to go away. The trials are coming. It's going to happen. The timing of it, I don't know. Fani Willis is, she said within 6 months, and now she's come out with a proposed date of March the 4th, which would be right before Super Tuesday. I have a question mark about that. Certainly we know that they're going to be, we have the World. Certainly we know there are going to be a lot of motions, etc., to try and postpone it. We know that Mark Meadows and now certainly Trump very shortly are filing motions in Georgia to try and have their cases removed to federal court. That, from what I understand, depends on, you can move a case to federal court if if your role at that time, if you were a federal employee and what you did, what you are accused of, was in relation to your job, your role as that federal employee. So there's some questions around that. But Giuliani was not a federal employee, so that will not apply to him. He's going to trial in Georgia. We have the world, and we have the hanged one, the hanged man. Right now, what Spirit is saying is he's in a phase of, he's scrambling with that Eight of Wands. He's in a phase of feeling stuck. He's feeling the pressure. He's feeling like he has nowhere to turn. I'm pretty certain that while Trump may have paid him lip service during that meeting, and when he went to him yesterday to ask, first of all, he took the meeting in person, which is interesting. But there were no promises made. Trump doesn't have it to give. Trump himself is drowning in debt. And we have the Ace of Swords. You all, as crazy as it sounds, I think that Giuliani's and the Queen of Pentacles. Yeah, there's somebody who's going to help him. And that could even be someone who steps up to represent him. Don't be surprised if you see a female attorney who shows up in some capacity to help Giuliani. Giuliani does have some floaties, as you know. As crazy as that may sound, he's got some floaties, and he may even have a life jacket. Now, will he make his way out of the ocean with all of that? We don't know, and all of that, of course, is metaphorical. But he's going overboard for sure. He has run out of money. He's definitely in trouble, and he's trying to utilize not just Trump, but more connections that he has, to the extent that he still has any influence. But see, so much of his influence has been tied directly to the role that he still plays with Donald Trump, and the idea that he was still Donald Trump's guy. I was waiting on it. I was like, come on, Spirit, I know it's coming. We have the Tower. Yeah, it's not looking good. But he's not out of rope yet. Like I said, for right now, maybe the life vest is gonna pop or something at some point. Right now, there are still options. There are people who will take his meetings like Trump did. There are people who will still take his phone calls. So there's a lot with that Ace of Swords. There's a lot of discussions that are being had, and he's not as cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, as we all know Giuliani can be and has increasingly become in recent years. We know that he's had some drinking problems, etc. He's got some issues. And there are, you look at him and you listen to him, there's some questions around his stability. But he is not stupid. And so he knows how this system works. He knows how to wheel and deal. He has people who are giving him information, because at this point they don't want him to flip completely on Trump. And we got to remember that with him being named, we know he's a co-conspirator in Jack Smith's case in that indictment, but he has been named among others in the Georgia indictment. So is there, as this begins to play out, who stands to lose the most, who has the least chess pieces to move, and therefore who maybe will begin to fold. And I think that's what we're going to see. He's trying to withstand the pressure for now. Trump may be giving him lip service to try and hold him off, because he knows there's a risk that he could completely flip, whereas he tried to buy time before in his interviews. We have the Empress and the Moon. There's so many major arcana coming up for this, you all. This is powerful energy. And the stakes here could not be higher. But with the Empress and the Moon, he is going to, this is the Fani Willis case, for sure. I'm seeing this tremendous feminine energy. This is the Fani Willis case. I do think he's going to appeal to some woman or women to help him out, either financially or through legal representation. But they are not, at the end of the day, this is going to tilt him over into some, not wishing him any harm. But I think this is going to tilt him over into some space that is not very healthy for him. There are going to be secrets that he will bring to light. That moon is about what has been done in darkness that comes to light in this instance, right? And, it's what we shed light on. It is the illumination of the moon. Think about, again, I'm going to the sea reference in the Titanic for him. So think about the moon in the black of night, the moon's rays reflecting over the water and casting light. Things are going to come to light, and out of a sheer situation of survival and scrambling, Giuliani is going to give up whatever goods he has. He's going to start to give that up because he really has no choice. He's running out of options. He's running out of money. He's running out of whatever friends he thought he had. And he's running out of the relationship that he has thought he cultivated all these years with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is no one's friend. And Rudy, if he thought that, he's having a really rude awakening right now. Look, going back to that tower card, he's having an extremely rude reawakening right now. And his words are literally coming back to bite him in the butt, his words and his actions. All right, you all? I'm going to wrap it up now for the second episode of Think Tank Thursday. I hope you enjoyed it. Cannot wait to get your feedback. And we'll come back next week remembering Trump has got this so-called report, damning report that he says he's going to release on Monday. Wednesday, we have the first GOP debate, which questionable whether or not Trump will appear, but whether or not he does, it's going to, in fact, I think if he does not appear, it's going to give us a really good opportunity to take a look at the other contenders and see how that works out. So that'll be on Wednesday night. So for sure, I'll see you here bright and prompt on for episode 3 of Think Tank Thursdays next Thursday. All right, take good care of yourselves, stay safe. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.